let's talk about something incredibly difficult. What happens when the very system that's supposed to protect you ends up being the thing that kills you? We're going to look at what happens when institutions, the ones built for justice, for care, for security, become places of death.
Really think about that question. It cuts right to the heart of our trust in the systems we live under. To even begin to understand what's at stake here, we have to look at a few stories that are, they're deeply disturbing, but absolutely crucial to understand.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with a so-called medical procedure that turned deadly. Then we'll shift to the war on terror in cases of torture. From there, we'll look at brutality inside U.S. institutions, and then state-sponsored mass murder. And finally, we're going to tie it all together with the one pattern that connects every single one of these stories, a shocking lack of accountability.
Okay, so our first case takes us to Germany. It's about a man named Lale Alamakande, and his story is a perfect example of how a pretty routine police action, something they called a procedure, can become fatal.
Alamakande was an asylum seeker, originally from Sierra Leone. Back in 2004, police picked him up because they suspected he'd swallowed some small packets of cocaine to hide them. But here's the thing. Instead of just waiting for nature to take its course, the authorities decided they were going to force the evidence out of him.
What they did is a procedure called forced emesis, and it was just brutal. They held him down as he fought against it, and when the medicine forced him to vomit, he started inhaling it into his lungs. And this is the part that's just unbelievable. The doctor kept going, continuing the procedure, which caused him to literally drown. He slipped into a coma and died 10 days later.
And make no mistake, this wasn't just some medical accident. The European Court of Human Rights looked at this practice and called it exactly what it was: torture. And get this, Alamakande wasn't the first. In that same city, this had been done to over 1,000 people. So that was a case of state violence hiding behind a medical procedure. Now let's turn to post-9/11 Afghanistan, a place where the lines got even blurrier and where people ended up dead in U.S. military and CIA custody.
This is Delaware. He was just a 22-year-old taxi driver. His big mistake? He picked up the wrong people as passengers near a U.S. base that had just been attacked. For doing his job, and because he had a broken walkie-talkie in his car, he was taken and handed over to American soldiers.
What happened over the next 4 days was pure horror. He was chained up by his wrists to the ceiling for so long, his shoulders dislocated. Guards beat his legs over and over, more than 100 times, with something they called peroneal strikes. These were powerful blows that did so much damage, his leg tissue was described by the coroner as pulpified. And the most tragic part of all, the interrogators themselves eventually decided he was probably just an innocent taxi driver.
And the stories just keep coming. Next, we have Abdullah Wali. He was a 28-year-old farmer who actually went to a U.S. base on his own. He wanted to prove he had absolutely nothing to do with a recent rocket attack, but instead of getting a chance to clear his name, he was taken into custody and tortured to death by a CIA contractor.
Over 2 nights, he was beaten so badly, his pelvis was broken. Witnesses said he was kicked with combat boots and hit with a heavy flashlight. By the second night, he wasn't asking for mercy anymore. He was just moaning, "I'm dying." By the 4th day, he was gone.
Now, let's shift our focus. We're moving from a war zone to inside the United States, to places like correctional facilities and youth camps where punishment became a death sentence.
This is Darren Rainey. He was 50 years old, and he was living with schizophrenia. He was in prison serving a 2-year sentence for cocaine possession. His story is just this gut-wrenching example of what can happen at the intersection of mental illness and the prison system.
As a punishment for soiling his cell, guards dragged him to a specially built shower where they had total control over the water temperature. They then locked him inside and turned the heat all the way up to scalding temperatures as high as 160 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 71 Celsius. He screamed and begged to be let out, but they left him in there for almost 2 hours. When they finally opened that door, he was dead on the floor.
And the physical evidence was just undeniable. 30% of his body was covered in 2nd and 3rd degree burns. When paramedics arrived, they said his skin was literally slipping off his body at the slightest touch. And the victims of these systems aren't always adults. Nicolaus Contreras, who went by Nick, was only 16 years old when he was sent to a privately run boot camp in Arizona. It was supposed to be a place that would help him get on the right track. Nick had asthma, and he got sick almost right away. But instead of getting him medical care, the staff just called him a faker. They forced him through brutal physical exercises. When he got so sick that he soiled himself, they made him sleep in his own filth on the bathroom floor. Those words on the screen, that was from his last phone call home. A desperate plea just before his body finally gave out and he collapsed for the last time.
So, the scale of what we've seen so far is already horrifying, right? Well, now it escalates dramatically. We're going to go inside Sadnaya prison in Syria, a place that's earned the name the Human Slaughterhouse because of its systematic, state-sponsored extermination program.
The brutality there was baked into the system, right from the very first second someone arrived. The guards even had a name for the initial beating every new prisoner got. They called it the welcome party. We're talking hours of torture, not to get information, but just to break people.
The killing happened on an industrial scale. I mean, on top of the daily torture, Sadnaya was basically a factory for secret mass executions. Amnesty International found that thousands of people were hanged after sham trials that lasted only a few minutes. And just look at the numbers for a 4-year period. Somewhere between 5,000 and 13,000 people murdered.
So, we've looked at a deadly medical procedure, a war zone, a domestic prison, and a state-run slaughterhouse. They all seem like they're worlds apart. But there is one single thread that ties every single one of these stories together, a shocking, consistent, and infuriating failure to deliver any real justice.
I mean, just look at the outcomes. For Lulay Alamakande's death, the doctor had to pay a fine. For Abdul Wali's murder, the CIA contractor got his sentence cut to less than 7 years. For Dilawar, a few light jail terms and reprimands. For Darren Rainey, no one was ever charged. His family just got a cash settlement. For 16-year-old Nick, most of the staff walked free on technicalities. And for Sadnaya, well, that was total state-sponsored impunity.
What you're looking at isn't a system of justice. It's a system of excuses. You get light sentences that are barely a slap on the wrist. You get financial payouts that just trade cash for accountability. And in the most extreme cases, you get absolute total impunity for the people who commit the worst crimes imaginable.
And that leaves us with one final and pretty chilling question. See, these are the stories that actually made it out because of journalists and investigators and brave survivors. So it just forces you to ask, if this is what passes for justice in the cases we actually know about, what's happening in all the thousands of other cases that stay forever hidden in the dark?